Well, hello again. Back by popular demand. Both of you, thank you for that. Yeah, so RC10 Graphite. Let's go into a little bit of history on this particular kit and just a few opinions about the whole process of re-releasing. I'll use that in re-releasing. It's not a car from back in the day, 1989. It's like a pattern car that's being released as it happens. But let's talk about the original. So 1989. You may or may not have been into RC then, even born at that point. Depends on who's watching. I was around. I was in my teens. Still into RC, but maybe not as much. Certainly, even if I knew about this, which I didn't at the time, RC10 was the original RC10 I was aware of. That was 84. So this came out a number of years afterwards. And these particular buggies, the RC10 series at this level, were all built for competition. With competition in mind. So everything that was put on the car or that you could add to the car we'll use that again in hop-ups. Unlike Tamiya hop-ups, which do to a point make things better, but a lot of their hop-ups are for bling and to make it look better, where hop-ups on these type of cars from 84 when the original one come out to we'll talk about this one, there was a purpose for the hop-ups. They made a difference, or they improved something to do with the buggy, which was already top-notch because it was built for racing. So 1989, the Graphite, it only came out in two variants, both kit form. The only difference that I've read a little bit about this. The only bit I can see that's slightly different was ball bearings or bushings. It's got a rigid woven graphite chassis. So we all like a little bit of graphite on the RC cars, but it can be expensive. You've got to remember the original Gold Pan, as it's called. The whole design of that buggy was unique and took the RC world by storm in that day, in that time period. So it wasn't just the graphite chassis that was a new feature. We'll go into some more detail in a minute, but it had a number of other improved parts to try and get people that were already racing, probably, to get into the competitive side of the RC world and actually racing. So this is what this was designed for. Like most of the team associated stuff, well, in fact, nearly, not all of it. I'm just trying to think out now what's out at the moment, but most team associated kits, RC cars, are for the competition area of RC. So the RC10 Graphite. So as I said, it was a self-assembly kit, which back in the day was normal. If you got a ready-to-run car of any sorts RC, it was toy grade, and if you're into RC racing, it definitely wouldn't have been something you would have bought anyway. Nowadays, it's like everything. It just seems to take a skew. This is why I've mentioned in other videos of mine, ready-to-run kits, for me, are just not... for me, are not worth buying. I wouldn't buy one. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to go down the other skew of armour, which come fairly pre-assembled, don't they, or done. Depends what you're buying. And there's many other kits that do that, so I get it. I do understand it, and I understand the sort of the customer that's built for. But for me, RC racing was also about the build of the car and understanding on how it all went together, and making mistakes, if you like, and making a mess back in the day. But this was a self-assembly kit, and it's gear driven with a one-piece woven chassis plate. It had a kick up at the end, which was to do with the angle of the front arms. That in turn would change the kingpin inclination, if you like. So they're kind of laying back a little bit to give it that kind of toe out on turns type of things, to get it to steer, basically. It also had a bolt-on alley motor mount with a coil-over oil-filled dampers. Now, the original had the gold... What, they're not gold-plated, are they? What are they? Gold anodized, typical RC10 shocks. Going back a little bit here, on this current release of fanRC, I think they've got hard anodized, but it's a different colour. They look like they're, from the picture, they do look, is it silver or is it titanium or something like that? But anyway, so this graphite, RC10 Graphite from 1989, had the same shocks as what the RC10 had in sort of this kit form box, standard box version. It also had, which we'll go into, it's interesting, I'm reading some notes here, what they say about this next bit. A limited slip, vari-lock ball diff. I mean, that in itself, a limited slip ball diff, amazing technology. The reasoning behind it, what they give anyway, is kind of, in my head, is what a diff should be doing. But for its time period, that's why, well, the diff in one of these is probably as important, or the next thing other than what the tyres are that are touching the ground. Because at the end of the day, it don't matter what you're using, whether it be a slot car, an RC car, a kart, or anything up and beyond motorsport, the only thing touching the ground are the tyres. So that has to be the first thing that's important. Then perhaps what it's attached to, i.e. shock absorbers, and then how it's driven is the gear setup, or the diff, or the drivetrain. That's it. All the other things, like the spring settings and damper settings and oil, have to be secondary. It has to work straight away on base settings. But very interesting nevertheless. A limited slip, vari-lock ball diff is what they call it, from 1989. I mean, it'd be interesting to see, going back, bringing that forward, what the fanRC diff layout is like. Another new point on the RC10. This is comparing it to the RC10, the graphite. So we're talking about the two different cars here, predominantly. Back in the day, 1984, for example, there were dog bone drive shafts in the RC10. This was one of the first times we had universal joint drive shafts, which transmit the power more efficiently to the wheels. It had low-profile pneumatic tyres. I'm not sure what that means, as in, they were still tyres, weren't they? Did they have foams in or not? I don't know. Pneumatic, they weren't solid, to my understanding, so I'm not quite sure why it's on these notes I'm reading, why they've highlighted that they're pneumatic. By the way, this must be an American wording, tyres, spelled T-I-R-E-S. I'm not saying that's wrong, but we don't spell it like that in the UK, T-Y-R-E-S, but does it matter? And you can still buy this bit as well. It also comes with a Protect 2 body shell. You can still get that off of eBay through suppliers, whether it be Penguin or other suppliers. In fact, I think I bought a Protect body shell for the RC10 40th edition, I think. and it comes with either oil-like bushings or a full set of ball bearings. So I don't understand why a kit of this caliber would even come with anything other than bearings. Or back in the day, why you'd buy one of these to race? Would you not? I mean, shelf queens and things certainly weren't a thing back then. I don't remember. Well, I certainly don't remember stuff like that. So with a few of these features, we'll go through these. I've got a list here, so we'll read them out. Sort of the main differences between the RC10 and RC10 Graphite. Doesn't just mean the chassis, which is interesting enough. Limited slip, vari-lock ball diff. And what it says, something really weird, what I know, I'm not saying you will know, but it allows the outside rear wheel to turn slightly faster than the inside on the corners. Now, actually, reading that out loud, a normal diff allows both wheels to turn at different radians, different speeds, if you like. So that would mean, interestingly enough, if you had a normal ball diff and you went around a corner, the outside wheel, the rear wheel, would have more distance to cover. So, well, that not move quicker anyway, or have to, it's got to cover more distance. Where the inside wheel can turn at a slower speed where it's turning on the spot. I thought that that's how a diff would work, especially a limited slip. But they've highlighted, maybe, I'm trying to think, on the RC10, it had a ball diff, did it not? From what I can't remember what I said now. Pretty sure it's got a ball diff. But the interesting thing is they've got limited slip vari-lock. Interesting. I mean, this is back in 1989. I don't think... I'm just trying to think. Well, the limited slip diffs were out on real cars. Of course they were. But something scaled it down into this sort of era. Certainly, from like a Tamiya perspective, ball diffs must have been around. 89? What was that? Is that like Manta Ray era? Don't know. My timeline doesn't log things that clearly in my brain. Maybe it was, but certainly for racing, it would seem. I don't think it was as popular now. The ball diff. People seem to go against a ball diff, and they either want like a geared diff, which is sealed, where you can put oil in it. And thickness of oil, same as the differential ball diff, I guess. But woven graphite chassis, quite a key thing if it's called an RC10 Graphite. It's got new rear hub carriers with more towing. If you don't know anything rear-wheel drive, I won't say it's predominantly off-road, but rear-wheel drive, the rear wheels are best to point in very slightly. I'm not saying on the road that's what happened because of tyre wear, but maybe they do. But certainly for competition, anything competition, the rear wheels need to toe in ever so slightly. It's not something like this. You won't be able to see it, but I suppose the more toe in, and some race cars in real life and definitely RC wise, you can adjust rear toe in on some kits. It's got longer front arms with 2 new shock mounting positions, so that allows you to adjust the shock angle, which will adjust the stiffness of your suspension without having to change oil or springs, which is, fairly unique maybe for this time period. But nowadays, in RC terms, most of the higher end buggies, I wouldn't say the standard basic level buggies, but most of them will have an adjustable top, where you put the top of the shock absorbers. New rear universal dog bone stub axles set up, so they've gone away. Well, it says universal dog bone. That's interesting. So they've got one end has to be a T that goes into where the gearbox is. Then it's got the universal drive shaft part, and then the stub axle on the end, which the wheel would bolt to. So it makes it more efficient. The idler gears are strengthened compared to the RC10. A couple of bits on here which you know, without reading these bits, I definitely wouldn't have known this. So it got new inline front axle and steering blocks for better handling. It's got low profile front and rear tyres, so they're not as balloon like. I mean, on the RC10, the rear tyres do have quite a big tyre wall, and I think I haven't even opened either one of those kits properly, the Clear or the RC10 40th edition, but the tyre wall, from memory, even I did look at the tyres as such, but they're quite high, so I'm guessing these lowered that for, you know, lower tyre wall, lower profile tyres are going to handle better, aren't they, as a rule of thumb. Interesting though, this came with an unpainted wing and body, fairly standard. It did say an associated stock motor, so back in the day, like normal, like they should, it's a kit to get you running. Less the electrics, which is fairly common. They might do like a deal where you'd buy the kit and the electrics, you build it all together to get you running. I suppose when you get to like racing situations, the electrics nevertheless is people's preference, depends if they've currently got a race buggy, I guess, or whatever. But it still came with a stock motor, something which is clearly missing, and I've said before, in today's RC sort of world, if you like. Even the fanRC comes with absolutely nothing, no wheels, tyres, nothing, just the chassis. You could argue, there's people that argue, is it worth the money? Is it not? A different video, different opinions, I guess. So other interesting facts about the graphite chassis. We know graphite and the reasons why some cars have a graphite chassis, strength and lightness. They do say, because I was looking down the timeline of the RC10, there was a TQ10 chassis. It said that this chassis is like the TQ10. I did try to look up TQ10. I couldn't really find anything of significance. So I don't really know what a TQ bit is. I mean, if I put TQ in my brain now, I think top qualifier. That's how I would read that, but it can't really mean that, can it? But this one was made of woven graphite, and it had an AE, Associated Electrics, it's their logo, milled into the chassis. Now, I don't clearly anything fanRC do, they won't be able to put that in because it isn't a team associated kit at all. And interesting here, this is one of the funny, odd, weird things about RC racing, or no, RC in general, not the racing part of it. It says, I quote, early versions of the chassis without the logo and missing the two holes at the rear for the motor guard are extremely rare and therefore highly collectible. The motor guard itself had to be purchased separately. So I'm guessing that's an interesting thing. There's a motor guard which you must have, and it sounds like, oh, it says early versions of the chassis, so maybe, does that mean, no, I'm just reading now again in my head. So early versions of the chassis didn't have the logo on there, and there was two holes missing, so you'd have to drill it yourself. That sounds like a Tamiya kit gone wrong, doesn't it? And the motor guard itself, purchased separately. A motor guard? Why was that? They give you a motor, a chassis. Why is the guard separate? That just doesn't seem to make sense to me. They also made, over the years, they did have different weaves of carbon, if you like. They've got pictures here, but there's no point putting those up. I suppose different woven carbon is different strengths or flex. I suppose there's one that's probably that everyone wants, and it probably looks better as well, I suppose, if you want a little bit of look behind it. The interesting, most of these, the RC10 and anything that's racing, I think where the weight needs to be, even nowadays, isn't it? as low down as possible, and hopefully the length of a chassis rather than across to the chassis like most standard kits are. For racing, the battery went down the middle of the chassis. Speed controller in this instance is usually fitted to the back of the shock tower. Back in these days, 1989, remember those receivers? They're massive, weren't they? Unlike nowadays, where they're tiny little things. So going forward now to the fanRC version, because it has the battery in the middle still, you're going to have plenty of room for the electronics. In fact, they'll still fit on the chassis, so you might not have to worry about putting the speed controller up on the rear shock tower. So it says the battery positioned along the length of the chassis, coupled with the Verilok ball diff and new rear hub carriers, provides reduced body roll and improves the grip in the corners, which stands to reason if you know anything about your centre of gravity on anything, to be honest with you. So all good for racing. And it does say here because there's plenty of space each side of the chassis for receiver and ESC. So even though the pictures I'm looking at, the ESC's on the back shock tower, you could still fit it either side, even then, where things were slightly bigger than what they are now. So we're not going to have a problem when it comes to the fanRC chassis. It does say it comes with the original gold anodized dampers, so the same as the RC10. Why not? They work brilliantly. Going back to something I said earlier, the inline front axle and steering blocks give a more positive steering response, and the turnbuckles allow for easy adjustment. So it's all based around the racing, which is what this kit would have been aimed at back in 1989. Certainly not just someone collecting, perhaps like nowadays, RC10 collectibles or, limited editions. fanRC have stated that this isn't going to be a limited edition. So they'll be producing as many as needed for people that want it. And the good thing is you can get spares, which means you can race this, which will lead me on to a sort of a thought at the end of this video. So I can see here on the picture I'm looking at, more holes for the damper adjustment. So it's got like 4 by the looks of it. So you can move the dampers like this on the top, which makes a big difference from a tuning perspective. Universal joint drive shafts. We know what they look like. More efficient. Lots of kits have those now as standard, especially if they're on the slightly competitive side of RC rather than like, I keep using Tamiya as an example. Usually Tamiya kits would have a hop up for this, which people buy because they are better. But for the most part, dog bones in Tamiya kits, for example, are fairly standard. But anything like this, maybe you can buy like hardened versions of these, but there's certainly the way this is done, it's aimed at the racers market anyway. The gearbox came with CNC machined steel idle gears. Interesting. If you know what CNC stands for, computer numerically controlled. I did know that, but only when I read it, to recite that, I wouldn't be able to. But when I read it, I thought, oh yeah, I remember that from my engineering college days. So steel idler gears, more efficient, stronger as you're putting more power through it. It's a vast improvement over the originals, which I think in the RC10 were they plastic or they're a different metal. didn't have the durability. But you got to remember these two kits, RC10 Graphite, will to look at could are quite different, but the running gear is or can be quite similar. I'm not saying you could you sort of swap and match each part for each kit. I don't know about that. I'm not too sure about that bit. So the RC10 kind of timeline, I'm not going to go too far down because it gets too modern, and this is basically about the old style of RC, especially the team associated side of it. So in 1984 RC10 came out. In 1989 we got two that came out. The RC10 TQ, well, they call it a TQ10 Graphite. They dropped the RC part, so I don't know what that is. I did look it up, couldn't really find anything. RC10 Graphite, 1989, as we're talking about. 1990, RC10 CE. Again, without looking into that, I'm not too sure. Again in 1990, RC10 Team Car. On here, it's a bit weird. 1992, RC10 CE was the same, but something revised. Then, I'll only go this far. 1994, the RC10 Worlds Car, which is what a lot of people nowadays would like to see re-released from Team Associated. So it's probably the latest of its era with all the goodies on it, but it still looks retro. After that, you start getting a more modern looking buggy where my brain, as I've said before, switches off. I'm not saying they're no good, because they definitely are, but I wouldn't buy one of those modernish buggies. I could be wrong on this, I might have skipped some out, but in 2013 RC10 Classic, so that was the gold pan, re-released. 2014, again, RC10 Worlds Car. So I'm just going down the list now, and maybe that's the last time we'll see that one. Yeah, so and it goes up to 2020. Clearly, pun not intended, we've got the RC10 Clear Edition. Then now has come the RC10 40th anniversary, I think it is. Possibly the RC10T. Well, it is out, but we can't get it in the UK. Well, some can, but I'm not be able to get that at the moment. So that's all team associated. So this is where the drive of whether or not fanRC are doing the right thing. I must admit, I didn't even know anything about fanRC. I've never heard of them. Even on the website which they advertised, it just says fanRC, and I didn't even click on it. It's only until I read about it from someone made a comment on the RC10cc, the Clear Edition, where someone would have bought aftermarket plastics for their RC10cc to put onto that car, and you can go and race it, which is what a lot of people want to do. Now you could argue, and this was before the RC10 40th edition came out. When you buy these kits, not so much the Clear, but the RC10 re-released recently one, the 40th edition, are you going to race it? Team Associated, to the best of my knowledge, haven't released spares. Maybe they have, but not in an abundance, and certainly not over here in the UK. So if you was going to race your RC10, my first thought is that or can that be used for vintage racing? And if you are going to race it, what do you do about spares? Because they're going to get broken. Things will break. which is where fanRC come in, where you can buy complete plastics, suspension and everything for that kit. So I don't know how much it is in the UK. Something like, I don't know, £80, maybe a little bit more than that, which is about probably like $120. So you could buy the spares needed to go and race it, which leads me on to fanRC have brought this chassis out for racing, because you can buy the spares in abundance from fanRC or their suppliers. But then RC10 Graphite, which it's a copy of it, it can't be officially listed as that. It isn't a classic vintage chassis. It's a new chassis. So then, are you allowed to use the graphite, this graphite version from fanRC, the one you can see in the picture? Are you going to be allowed to use that in the vintage class? Or has it got to go in two-wheel drive modern? If it has to go in two-wheel drive modern class, I'll be honest, it's going to struggle with those front bus type body shells, purely because technology and the tech in those cars, even basic, you know, the RC10, whatever they are, B 6 point something or other, B whatever, they're going to be better, aren't they? Perhaps that's what the B stands for, better. Where the fanRC one is set up as the RC10 Graphite, but it's not an RC10 Graphite. So what do you think? Should we be allowed to use the RC10 Graphite fanRC in vintage class racing? I don't know. I mean, I've really bought this one with the hope that you can. I've got an even more local club that does buggy racing to me. It's literally 15 minutes away. Outdoor AstroTurf. Maybe. If I've got to use it in modern two-wheel drive, I'm not so sure. Even if I was competitive, I'm not so sure that would be. But anyway, that's a debate for a different video. It's not going to be for everyone. There's purists out there that would only buy a graphite RC10 from Associated themselves, and that's fair enough. You know, I don't, whether the World's Edition or the RC, or what would happen now if if Team Associated officially re-released the graphite version, because it would come. To be fair, it would come more complete, would it not, with wheels and tyres? Which isn't the end of the world, I suppose, which is why fanRC have brought their chassis out with no wheels and tyres. It depends where you're going to race it. Lots of racing kits nowadays, if you buy them, they sold as like a rolling chassis with a shell, and when you read the description, it says things needed to complete the kit: body shell, wheels, tyres, you know, your standard electrics. So you actually just buy a chassis, and you know that's expensive enough as it is. But I suppose it depends where you're going to race it. Where you're going to race it, indoor or outdoor. I guess that's their thinking. I think they should give you the option. Do you want carpet tyres or AstroTurf tyres or dirt tyres? Depends where you're going to race it, and then include that with the kit. I don't see a reason why they should not include wheels and tyres. If they did it back in the day, so why can't they do that now? Same as a motor, you can perhaps now you might better understand. I don't know. I'm not saying I agree, but why don't they include a motor in there? But there's so much choices now, and I suppose it depends what spec you're going to be racing. They're assuming, of course, you're going to be racing, but there's going to be people that might buy these race buggies, but just keep them as like shelf queens, or just something they can bash around in their garden or their land where they want to use their, but just to whiz around. I don't know the real reasons, but Anyway, that's a little bit of a timeline with Team Associated. I hope you enjoyed it. There'll be more about these cars and this sort of particular era as and when I pick up my fanRC version. Maybe I will do a video on the build of this. Thing is, there's going to be lots of people doing builds on YouTube on these cars, so you know it gets saturated. So I don't know. I mean, I would like to do a build video because I've got the other RC10 kits to do, the classic, as in the classic clear, and then the 40th edition, but they've sort of been done to death already on YouTube, so it kind of it's victim of its own success, shall we say. So but I think I will do a video of this one because it's not a team associated RC10 graphite, but it looks like one. And my plan is to race it. It depends. I'll have to speak to my local club and see what they say. We'll go. I'm not sure when that will happen, by the way. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Appreciate all your feedback and everyone sort of listened to what I dribble on about. But it is much appreciated. There's a few people out there that do communicate with me lots and lots on videos, and it is appreciated. And I tend to always get back to you guys because it's what makes this hobby great, isn't it? So thanks for watching, and I shall see you soon for the next one. Have a good day, and bye for now.